There is a type of person that manipulators cannot touch, not because they fight back, not because they're cold, not because they've built walls, but because they genuinely do not need anything from anyone. And that right there is the most terrifying thing a toxic person can ever encounter. You cannot guilt someone who does not need your approval. You cannot threaten someone who is not afraid of losing you. You cannot control someone who is already complete before you arrived. Psychologists have a name for this psychological state. Most people never reach it, but some people were born wired for it. And if you have ever felt more at peace alone than in a room full of people, if you have ever looked at your own company and thought, this is enough, then what I'm about to tell you will change the way you see yourself forever. Stay until the end, because the last thing I reveal is the one thing that makes people like you impossible to break. And once you understand it, nobody will ever have power over you again. Let me start with something most people will never say out loud. The world is not designed for people who do not need it. Schools reward the kids who raise their hands the most. Workplaces promote the people who network the hardest. Relationships punish the people who are genuinely okay being alone. And somewhere along the way, if you are the kind of person who recharges in silence, who thinks more clearly when the room is empty, who looks at a full social calendar with dread instead of excitement, you were told in 100 different quiet ways that something was wrong with you. Too cold, too quiet, too independent. Here is what nobody told you. Manipulators, narcissists, toxic personalities, they run psychological calculations before they choose a target. And the one profile that stops them dead center every single time, the person who does not need anything from them. Because every control tactic ever designed, guilt, withdrawal, jealousy, approval, works on one assumption that you need something. Remove that assumption, remove the entire game. Today, Mind Authority breaks down the 5 psychological traits of the person who becomes impossible to control. And more importantly, the honest question you need to ask yourself to know if you actually have them or if you just think you do. Trait 1. Your brain does not fear its own company. In 2014, psychologist Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia ran an experiment that sounds almost like a joke. He placed people alone in an empty room for 15 minutes. No phone, no book, nothing but their own thoughts. The only other option was a button. Press it and receive a mild electric shock. 2/3 of the men and 1/4 of the women pressed the button. Physical pain was more tolerable than 15 minutes alone with themselves. Now think about you. When you are alone, your brain does not scream for an exit. It settles in. It goes somewhere most people never reach. Psychologists call this elevated internal awareness, the ability to self-generate mental stimulation without needing outside input. Here is why this matters in terms of psychological power. Every manipulation tactic ever designed depends on you being afraid of your own silence. Guilt trips work because you cannot sit with the discomfort. Silent treatment works because you cannot tolerate the emptiness. Withdrawal works because you cannot stand the absence. When your brain is genuinely comfortable alone, all of those tactics dissolve. But here's what this same trait costs you. Comfort with silence can become an excuse to avoid the conversations you actually need to have. People who are good at being alone sometimes become too good at it. They call avoidance peace. They call emotional distance self-sufficiency. They process everything internally and share nothing, and then wonder why their closest relationships feel shallow. The trait is real, the power is real, but do not let it become a reason to stop showing up.
Trait 2. You process deeper. Here is something that looks like a weakness, but functions like a weapon. You get drained by social interaction faster than most people. Not because you are fragile, because you are running a completely different process. Neuroscientist Elaine Aron spent decades studying what she called sensory processing sensitivity. About 15 to 20% of the population carries this trait at a heightened level. When these people talk to someone, they're not skimming the surface. They are tracking micro-expressions, picking up the gap between what is said and what is meant, picking up emotional undercurrents that most people are not even aware exist. And recent research on this type of nervous system shows something even more interesting. People with this wiring show measurably lower dependence on external reward systems. They don't need constant social feedback to feel regulated. Their internal world already provides what most people hunt for externally, which means praise does not inflate them and criticism does not collapse them. They calibrate internally, not from the crowd. Here's the concrete version of that. Have you ever met someone that everyone in the room immediately loved? Charming, warm, instantly likable. And you stood there thinking, something is off. You didn't know what it was, you couldn't explain it, but something in you would not fully trust them. 3 months later, everyone else discovered what you already felt in that first conversation. Most people notice manipulation after the damage is done. You noticed it during the introduction. That's not luck. That's a nervous system doing work other people are not capable of. But here's the challenge hiding inside this trait. Depth of processing can become depth of suffering. The same wiring that lets you sense deception also picks up every piece of tension in a room you walk into, every shift in mood, every unspoken conflict, everything people are pretending is fine when it's not. That's not always a superpower. Sometimes it's just exhausting, and people with this trait sometimes use that exhaustion as a reason to stop engaging entirely, when what they actually need is to learn which environments are worth the bandwidth. Not everywhere deserves your full depth, but some places do. The skill is learning which is which. Trait 3. You do not perform. Most social interaction is performance. People present the version of themselves they calculate will be most approved of. They modulate, edit, filter, perform. The person who prefers solitude does not have a well-developed performance mode, and that is not a social skill they are missing. It is a layer of manipulation they never built. Psychologists have documented that people with high authenticity scores, where the gap between their public self and private self is near zero, are significantly harder to manipulate. Here is the mechanism. Manipulation requires a target who is invested in their own image. It needs them to care what you think, to need to seem a certain way. When you genuinely are the same person alone as you are in front of others, there is nothing to threaten. A narcissist's favorite weapon is to attack your reputation, to threaten exposure, to make you look a certain way in front of people who matter to you. But you cannot embarrass someone who was never pretending. You cannot expose someone who was always visible. Here is the part that is harder to hear. Not performing also means not adapting, and there is a difference between being authentic and being inflexible. Some people who wear their "I don't care what anyone thinks" identity like armor are not actually free. They have just found a more sophisticated way to avoid being seen. True authenticity is not indifference. It is the willingness to be fully visible and still not change for approval. That requires courage, not just comfort. Make sure you know which one you are actually operating from. Now, I need to stop, because everything I just described is real. but it only matters if you are being honest with yourself about one thing. There are two types of people who prefer being alone. The first type has genuinely processed their internal world. Their need for external validation has quieted, not because it was suppressed, but because it was met from inside. Solitude is not where they hide, it is where they return to themselves. For them, alone feels like freedom. The second type shows solitude after being hurt, after being controlled, betrayed, abandoned, dismissed. And at some point, the brain made a calculation. If I need nothing from anyone, no one can take anything from me. That calculation made sense at the time. It may have even kept them safe, but protection is not the same as power, and a wall is not the same as a foundation. Here's the uncomfortable part. Both of these people look identical from the outside. They both prefer being alone. They both get drained in social situations. They both have small circles. They are both described as independent, but one of them is free and one of them is hiding. And the worst part, the hiding version often cannot tell the difference because the story they tell themselves, "I just don't need people," feels like truth. It feels like clarity. It feels like a personality trait rather than a wound that learned to wear confidence as a costume. Here's how you tell them apart. The free version can choose connection without losing themselves. They can be close to someone without needing that person to survive. They can be fully present without constantly monitoring for the exit. The hiding version feels a specific discomfort at the idea of real closeness. Not preference, not introversion, discomfort. The kind that comes with a quick internal justification. I just value my independence. Most people aren't worth the energy. I've been burned too many times. Those sentences feel like self-awareness. Sometimes they are something else. Ask yourself this: when you imagine letting someone genuinely close, not performance close, not surface close, but actually close, does it feel like a choice you are making from fullness, or does it feel like something you would have to survive? If it feels like survival, everything I described in this video is still yours. Those traits are real, that wiring is real, but it is sitting on top of something that deserves more attention than this video can give it. And the most powerful version of you, the genuinely untouchable version, is not the one who built walls high enough that no one can get in. It is the one who stopped needing walls in the first place. Traits 4 and 5, the weapons. Trait 4, you do not negotiate your peace. Most people manage their peace. They adjust it based on who is in the room. They give it to whoever demands it loudest. They give it away to avoid conflict and then wonder why they feel empty. The person who has done the internal work, genuinely done it, has returned to their own silence enough times to know what it actually feels like. And once you know what your peace actually feels like, you stop swallowing things that are not it. You stop tolerating conversations that leave you worse than you entered. You stop maintaining relationships that require you to shrink. You stop giving access to people who use it as leverage. Psychologists call this an internal locus of control, the belief that your emotional state is yours to manage, not others to determine. It is the foundation of every boundary that actually holds. The challenge here? Peace can become passivity. Protecting your peace sometimes becomes an excuse to never do the hard thing, the hard conversation, the difficult relationship, the growth that only happens in friction. Protect your peace from what drains you, not from what challenges you. Those are different things. Trait 5, you curate, not collect. Your circle is small, not because you failed at connection, because you refused to perform it. The people who made it through, they know they were chosen, not needed. And that distinction
Being chosen rather than needed is the foundation of every relationship that survives real pressure.
Here is what all of this builds toward. When you stop operating from incompleteness, when you stop reaching outside yourself to feel whole, something shifts in how the world interacts with you. People sense it before you say a word. They cannot explain it, but they treat you differently because everyone, at some level, can feel when they are dealing with someone who does not need anything from them. And that is the moment every manipulator's toolkit becomes useless. Not because you fought them, not because you exposed them, because you simply had nothing they could take. The moment you stop needing people to complete you is the moment people lose the ability to control you. This is Mind Authority. Subscribe because next week we go deeper into the psychological signatures that make certain people impossible to break. You will not want to miss that one.